I think I'm
Okay.
good. In core action 3, there's quite a few that I still feel like we're working on as a group. Some days are better than others. Today wasn't as good as I would have liked it to have been, to be able to say that there were some that were really exemplary in what we did. The one that I feel that the students really did well with was picking the appropriate tool that they needed in order to help them. There were just a few students that I had to guide them to either graph paper or something else that might help them when they were logging or writing or recording, so that they had some attention to precision when they were drawing some of those boxes with their arrays. However, the students were really persevering through what they were doing, as well as using some of those tools in that process of persevering through it.
This question here, let me rephrase it. Would you like to comment on any of the students' work today? Was there something that delighted you or surprised you with this work?
Mm-hmm. Okay. There were a few students that surprised me, and then there were a few students I wasn't quite sure where they were going with their math thinking. Some of the students, again, looking at, just recently we've started using one of the multiplication tables as a tool in math right now, because we're not really looking for procedural fluency with multiplication and division. We're looking, can the students use tools when they're problem solving? So I had a few students that surprised me in going right to that. And then they started using X's, a lot of the students, and I think I noted that throughout the lesson as I was walking around and said something to a group. I've never seen them use X's before. However, the X's did work because they were building those into some form of an array when they were drawing it. And their explanation with that was the X's were much easier to make than having to draw equal squares when they were doing arrays or drawing dots or circles. So that piece was very interesting to me. Seeing one of the students use tally marks, I had not seen that used when we're talking about equal groups, and he really did have the tally mark with the 5, where he had the 4 up and down, and then the 5th one crossed. The other student that had one other piece with it, with his equations, and his equations that he had weren't necessarily matching his pictures, so I think that attention to detail is something that he can work on. However, in talking with him, he totally understood the math behind it. So it was that attention to precision that really might need some more of that work, as opposed to him really understanding the mathematical concepts we were getting to today.
Great instructors are continuously learning, and we want to understand what you celebrated in this lesson and what you would improve upon. Reflecting on this lesson, what worked well and what might you do differently?
Yes, teachers are constant learners. I don't think there's ever a day that we don't learn something, either from our students or from different articles we read or from each other in talking in the hallways. I think that for students, what went well was the fact that all students were engaged. You saw them persevering through it. Some were at different levels of their perseverance than others. The things that were probably things that we could improve upon was that sharing with students, where they were really able to turn to their partner and share some of their thinking. I was with a group where I have a student that has some speech therapy issues and is really working toward having some of those conversations and looking at those accountable talk stems to help you. Like, I did this with my math, and this is what, and so he's really working toward that, and I felt that that was probably something learning-wise that I can go back and say, okay, go back to that team that helps work with him. What can we do to help him in that communication piece? Because I think the math was really going on up in his brain, but he wasn't able to come out verbally and be able to explain that. Did that answer the question? I can't remember what the question was.
It was okay. What worked well and what worked,
okay.
What worked well and what would you do differently?
Okay. All right.
You feel good about it?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then this is the last question. It's a little redundant, but were there any surprises or unexpected student behaviors or reactions today?
That's a good one. Today, during the lesson, students reacted in different ways. I was really surprised by some students that normally would be sharing ideas or sharing thoughts. They were very quiet today. So I'll be curious tomorrow and the next day when we move towards some other problems that we're working toward, to see if they are able to come out and express some of the pieces that they had. I was very excited to see adding that component of having students put up vocabulary words that they were coming across, where one student was consistently doing that for me, kind of being my little assistant with it as we were moving along.
You're done.
Okay.
Good job.
Thank you.
Very cool. Okay.
In looking at the core indicators, one of the pieces in looking at math is giving the teacher giving herself or himself permission to go ahead and give the students a problem and stop talking. And that's really been something that I've been working on in the last 3 years in looking at Common Core. In Common Core, it's kind of relinquishing what we control as the teacher and becoming that facilitator, as hard as that is, but posing the problem to the student and then letting them discover what to do. In the past, I used to take a problem and then I would hand out all of the math manipulatives or the tools that they needed in order to do the things to solve the problem. And now I just kind of give the problem, which is what you saw today in the lesson, and then having the students come up with, okay, what tool works best for me? And before we started with those, giving them that option, we actually had to go to explicit teaching and teaching them how to use some of the tools that they were using today, building up to that.
Good, you're doing great.
Good.
We're interested in how the shifts required by the CCSS are being incorporated into your classroom. Discuss how this lesson illustrates the shifts required by the CCSS.
The shifts really are having teachers think about their teaching. I think before we were looking at curriculum that was adopted by our district, whether it was a textbook or other types of materials. And when we would use those materials, it was pretty much just, if you teach this, it's a checklist. If you teach it, then the students will have it and you move on to the next thing. With Common Core, we're really looking at some key pieces where the shifts have us really analyzing, is this lesson really giving those students the opportunity to have that discovery when we're talking about either conceptual understanding or application, as well as looking at the rigor of what we're doing. Or what are we doing? Is what we're doing really what's best for students to discover? Or are we just doing something to do something? And it's not to say that teachers just do things to do things, but I think sometimes when we do look at checklists, it's marking something off of what we've done. And now it's really more about making sure the students are understanding what they're doing and being able to communicate that. And I think that's the biggest piece of where the shifts are taking us with Common Core.
How did you teach the content of this lesson prior to the CCSS? What's the same and what is different?
Well, when I used to teach this particular same lesson, I probably never would have given this problem to students. I would have thought that it would be too difficult. Students would literally start to cry, especially third graders. They're 8 years old. They don't really think in that way, and we're pushing them to do that. So first of all, I would have never probably given this type of problem to the students 3 or 4 years ago. With that said, I think that in my process in teaching, I always was looking at the students in their learning process and knowing that it wasn't just one piece of material that was going to help them understand something. But there wasn't that cohesiveness of what I was thinking with what do they need in the beginning to build upon to get them to that understanding at the end. And I think that's really where this lesson is exemplifying that. It's giving the students permission to struggle, to have to actually persevere through something that they're trying to accomplish, because it builds their confidence. In the past, I used to just give an algorithm and make them memorize it and then get really upset if they didn't understand the algorithm, or put it up on the board and say, look, just look at the algorithm and plug in those numbers. And now it's, here's your problem. What are you going to do with this? And then as seeing students as they're not progressing toward the way to the correct answer or one of the correct processes to find the answer, it's figuring out those questions that you can ask to redirect them. And I probably, last year was the first year that I had gotten back into third grade with those 8-year-olds, and they did cry a little bit giving them these problems. And I've learned that maybe I need to scaffold a little bit better. And so this year I feel like I've done that with the students in making sure that they are having the right tools that they need in order to be successful when I do give them a problem like this.
Good. All right, we're moving on.
Okay.
Student engagement is crucial to the work of the CCSS. We want to understand how you ensured that all students had the opportunity to productively engage in the work of the lesson. First question is, how did the students handle this lesson Did they understand the mathematics, and how do you know?
Engagement is huge with students. That's the one way that they're going to learn. If they're not active in their learning, we don't really know as a teacher if that learning has taken place for them. Looking at the problem, it was an accessible problem with the students, and so knowing the students that I have, I knew there would be some that may only come up with 2 or 3 different ways that you could make an equal group of 36, where other students might be able to find all of the ways with 36. But as we look at that, how do we know when they're getting it? It's that walking around and looking at what students are putting on their paper and then asking them questions. There were quite a few students that had some things in their journal that they were drawing and that they were doing that wasn't really making sense to me. But then once I sat and talked with them and asked them some questions, I was understanding their reasoning. So that's one way that you know. When you know that a student doesn't know, it's when you're looking at their mathematics and it's not really talking about what the essential piece of the question was asking, which was the equal groups. There were a few students when I walked around that were taking the problems and they were taking not equal groups. So one boy had 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 10 plus 6, and that really wasn't an equal group. And so in talking with him, we did agree that 5 and 5 were 2 equal numbers, but then when we got to the 10, he realized that that was not an equal group and he needed to go back and think about that. But again, not really telling him the answer, but letting him discover that on his own.
Explain how you differentiated in this lesson. Did all students have the opportunities to work on the grade level content? If students did not have the opportunity, explain why.
All students did have the opportunity to work on a grade level standard question. It was a high level question that they were asked to work on. Knowing though, I did have a few students that were still struggling and trying to wrap their brain around that equal group, trying to figure out what it was going to be to help them, what I would do as the teacher to help them get to that next level. All 3, well, I should say 2 of the 3, did go ahead and go to the math tools that we had, and were using them to manipulate the groups. Where one of them was stuck was really trying to write down what they were doing. So looking to see what I might do differently with that particular student is maybe having him start drawing more quickly, or maybe sitting with him and guiding him through some of those things that he's talking about as he's moving forward. For some of the other students that weren't quite there, looking to maybe see if I could do a pull-out small group to really get them to that comfort level, because you could tell that they were engaged, but they weren't quite understanding what it was that they were doing and if it was really making sense to them.
And then what do you do for the more advanced students?
The more advanced students in the class, I had strategically grouped the students in today's lesson, because what I found with my students is we typically as teachers will group someone with a higher level skill with maybe a medium skill or a lower skill, and they would help each other. And what I've noticed with math now is when you do that, it kind of stifles the higher thinking student. And so in math, I've really tried to put some students that are thinking at a higher level together to see where they could bring themselves to that next level. In today's lesson, it didn't capture so much in what I was talking with them on, but I do know in looking at their work that they had in their journals, there was some of that higher level thinking in what they were doing. One boy in particular was moving away from really doing arrays into getting to some equations. And even though Lucas was captured on video describing what he had done with his equations, his explanation to me at the table was at a much higher level than where he was. I think he was nervous, speaking to the whole group and not sure if what he was going to say was going to be correct. But really starting to look at that progression of how students problem solve and knowing that that higher group is moving toward that higher level, moving to equations, as well as looking at that distributive property as well as associative property.
Let's see here. Okay, so now we're moving to which behaviors from the core action 3 did students best exemplify in this lesson?
Can I look at my notes really
Yeah,
quick?
go for it. All right, so we want to understand the decisions you made in planning for this lesson and how it fits into the unit and year. First question, how does this lesson connect to and build on students' prior skills and knowledge? What was taught before the lesson and what will come after it?
Okay. So one of the things with third grade is we are working toward, when we think about planning with where the kids are starting from and where they're going to, when we're thinking about multiplication and division, students have not yet had that concept. And so at the beginning of the year, we were taking students where they were taking hands-on manipulatives and literally taking a number and putting them into equal groups. And that was something that we focused on toward the beginning of the year. As we moved to today's lesson, one of the things that we're trying to build upon is really having those students take those equal groups now and build them into arrays, working toward possibly using manipulatives again to find those equal groups, which is what a lot of students did today. And then moving them toward possible equations where they're seeing that we made an array of 4 by 9, and then they would move toward equations with 4 times 9 equals 36. And then again, moving them where they might even be able to break those numbers apart.
Talk about the standards or cluster targeted in this lesson. What did you do to make the lesson reflect the full intent of that standard or cluster?
Okay. The lesson today was really focusing on the cluster of multiplying and dividing numbers, which is one of our huge standards in third grade with Common Core. When we do that, one of the pieces is, which the lesson focused on, was dividing a number within 100 using real world problems as they do that, where students are showing either their understanding with drawing something that shows their understanding using arrays, or possible equations with that.
Which of the core action indicators do you think this lesson best exemplified, and how do you plan for this?
Ooh, can I look at my notes?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
Whenever you're ready, you are on.
Okay. Hi, I'm Katie Scherr. I teach at Collin Ranch Elementary School in Reno, Nevada. I taught a third grade math lesson today working on equal groups.